the shooting range. In this episode, how to play the Dornier 335, how Japan basically invented naval monoplanes, Hotline, the developers answer questions that you've left in the comments. But first, let's start with how the USSR created its first MBT. A great Soviet designer, Alexander Morozov, had his own way of making new tanks. He always tried to maximize the size of the tank as much as possible. It would enable making it light but well armed and protected at the same time. The first serial tank he created using that concept was the T-44. It was as light as the T-34-85 and had similar armament, but its armor was much stronger. Later, it became a base for the T-54 that was even better in both armor and guns. In 1952, the Soviet leaders got the word about a new American tank, the M47, that caught up with the T-54 in performance and data. And now, the USSR had to raise the stakes and create something better than the T-54. This basically was the task for Morozov's construction bureau, to create a tank better in every way than the T-54, that could weigh as much. So basically, the new tank wouldn't be heavier than 36 tons. The engineers came up with two variants of the project they called Object 430. The first one had a longitudinal diesel V engine which made the engine compartment larger but allowed the placing of some fuel tanks that were partially used as ammo racks. But the second one was the winner. It used a brand new opposed two-stroke diesel engine that was transverse mounted and connected to two transmissions. This layout made Morozov famous and was later used in almost all his projects. One of the main advantages of this system was its size. The engine compartment of the second variant was only 120 centimeters long, a whole meter shorter than the first one. So, the new tank weighed the same, 36 tons, but it received a bigger weapon load, thicker armor, better running gear, and a more powerful engine. Job done. Then began the tests, and while the engineers were correcting the final flaws, the Cold War brought some new requirements. Now they had to protect the tanks from radiation in case of nuclear war action. And in the West, they introduced new tanks into service that had a 105mm gun. Object 430 never made it to the production, but it served as a base for Object 432. It had almost the same chassis, but the other parts received some revolutionary changes. For instance, the tank got composite armor that used steel and fiberglass for the hull and steel and aluminium for the turret. They also swapped the usual 100mm rifled gun for a 115mm smooth bore with a 30-shot autoloader. And guess what they got rid of next? Of course, the loader. The new tank was only meant for a 3-member crew. The production began in 1963, and 3 years later, after all the tests and corrections, the tank got into service as the T-64, the first Soviet MBT that still lives on, as it became the basis for a lot of tanks that are made today. Aircraft can give a lot of support to the ground forces in combined battles using missiles and bombs. But pilots with really good aim can destroy enemy tanks using only their machine guns. There are even special planes created for pilots like that. Let's look at one of them. The Dornier 335 is a fast and hardy aircraft with incredible firepower. Imagine, it can carry up to 1 ton of bombs. Plus, it has 2 20mm and 3 30mm guns that can deal massive damage to any tank with the help of armor-piercing ammo. The main condition for a good strike is, of course, a good dive. Remember that this bird is heavy, so make sure that you've gained enough altitude to exit the dive. Another important thing to remember is that this aircraft wasn't designed to fight enemy fighters. If someone spotted you, better lead the enemy to anti-aircraft guns or retreat to your landing field at ground-hugging altitude. There are air defense systems that will protect you. Attack air targets only flying past them. In other cases, better ignore them. As for the ammo, we recommend separating the gun controls and loading the 20mm guns with anti-aircraft belts and the 30mm guns with the armor-piercing ones. Use them separately and don't waste the ammo. And if you're using bombs, remember about the timer. 2 seconds should be enough. The Dornier 335B2 isn't afraid of anyone from the ground. It has enough power to penetrate and destroy any tank. Also, this one is a premium aircraft, which means you get a lot of expensive and silver in the process. And now, let's go to Japan, where the first naval monoplane fighter was invented. A couple of general facts. Monoplane fighters with cantilever wings appeared at the turn of the 1930s and gradually ousted the biplane fighters once and for all. At first, it was a serious competition, as the monoplanes didn't have the great advantage of speed and were completely losing in maneuverability. But then the new engines appeared. The monoplanes easily exceeded the 450 kph velocity, which was a top biplane speed. After that, land-based aviation switched to monoplanes. But in naval aviation, biplanes were popular for almost another 10 years. The problem was with the monoplane construction because of a single wing, where the landing speed was usually too high for carrier deck landings. It was very easy to fly past the carrier and never even notice it, whereas on the contrary, a plane flying too slow would just fall in the water and sink. So, in almost every country, the monoplanes first appeared in the ground force and later in the Navy. But there was one exception. Japanese fighter aviation in the early 30s was all about biplanes, Army and Navy alike. Basically, just like everywhere else. The best of the naval fighter planes was the Nakajima A4N1. When it became obsolete, the Navy came up with terms of reference for a new fighter, one that could reach more than 350 kph. However, they accidentally forgot to mention that the aircraft has to be a biplane. But then again, wasn't it obvious? Who'd create a monoplane for naval use in the first place? Well, there was this one aircraft designer working at Mitsubishi, a young man called Jiro Horikoshi. He was really pleased to find this loophole in the TOR. Those soldier boys basically allowed him to create a truly revolutionary plane. He had it all calculated long before, so the work was going pretty fast. Mitsubishi created an elegant monoplane with an inverted gull wing and closed canopy. The chassis wasn't retractable, but it was nothing compared to estimated velocity of the plane. The Navy command were about to be surprised. During the very first test flights, the aircraft reached 440 kph. After receiving this information, the military could only laugh. Mitsubishi clearly were joking. There was an error in the report. And they kept laughing until the new Mitsubishi A5M got to the Navy, and the test pilot reached 445 kph without even trying. Somehow, despite being able to speed up that much, The plane's landing speed wasn't that much more than a biplane's, and it was even more maneuverable than the A4N1, the best Japanese naval biplane fighter, all thanks to those calculations that Horikoshi had made. The military were astonished. The young aircraft designer created the fastest monoplane fighter in the world that was also more maneuverable than the best biplane one. Moreover, it was designed for naval operations, which meant it had reinforced construction and an arresting hook that significantly increased the weight of the aircraft. And if someone would recalculate it for ground missions, well, you get the idea. In 1935, the renewed A5M went into production. Horikoshi added a 3-blade propeller and ditched the inverted gull wing for another type. He also got rid of the closed canopy. The pilots didn't like it. Sure, the plane wasn't armed enough. It only had 2 machine guns. But why would you need more if the plane is so agile and maneuverable that you can tail any enemy aircraft and literally shoot its pilot's ears off? And yes, the armor wasn't good either. But then again, it's a fighter plane in the 30s. None of those was ever well protected. Naval pilots were so excited about the new toy that no one actually thought about the curious fact: the first Japanese monoplane fighter turned out to be a naval one. Moreover, it was the first naval monoplane fighter in the world. Surprisingly, Jiro Horikoshi didn't make the headlines even after his plane went through a couple of modifications and a lot of action. Apparently, the world couldn't stand the fact that Japan suddenly became one of the leaders in aircraft engineering. Then Horikoshi was offered to create the next fighter. This one, nobody could ignore. But that's a whole different story. Get ready for the traditional last part of our show, Hotline. Developers answering questions from the comments. The first question comes from One Max. Can we get the MiG-19 now? We have to do a lot of testing of the new planes and the Vietnam War planes before we can answer that. Right now, we can say that MiG-19 isn't working in the existing balance. It's too fast for it. A player called Scale Titan asks, I know we're getting into the Cold War era, but we're missing enemy World War II vehicles, so are you guys still going to finish the World War II tanks? We don't plan to stop adding World War II planes and tanks. Of course, the most famous tech is mostly already in the game, but there are still a lot of interesting and unusual machines that we plan to add later. Then there is a question from Andre Dalia. Will we ever see more interesting bombing targets in air battles like train stations, factories, ammo dumps, fuel refineries, etc.? Sometime later, maybe. We're thinking about that. But this isn't the first priority. And the last serious comment comes from Savari. It's over, T-114. I have the high ground. You obviously underestimate its power. That's it for today, but feel free to write your questions in the comments below. We do read them all, and you might see some of them answered in the next episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you on the shooting range.